Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, August 29th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, we remember Minnesota shooting victims. Plus 20 years since Katrina, what lessons have we learned? And how the storm may have been an early warning sign of an ongoing insurance crisis. We begin with the horrific shooting from earlier this week in Minneapolis. Families describing unimaginable loss remembered their slain children yesterday, the day after an attacker fired through the windows of a Catholic school church. Those killed were 8-year-old Fletcher Merkel and 10-year-old Harper Moisky. Fletcher's family remembered him as a loving child who enjoyed friends, fishing, cooking, and any sport that he was allowed to play. Harper's family said she was a bright, joyful, and deeply loved 10-year-old whose laughter, kindness, and spirit touched everyone who knew her. 18 other people, most of whom were student children, were struck by gunfire, according to authorities. Several were injured severely, and their families have set up fundraising efforts to help with medical bills. You can read more on usatoday.com. Today marks 20 years since Hurricane Katrina ravaged parts of the southern U.S. It's clear America remembers the storm. How about its lessons? The questions Katrina raised in 2005 on climate, government, and race persist today. I spoke with USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page for more. Susan, as always, thanks for joining me.
Taylor, it's always great to be with you.
So just starting with this, how are Americans remembering Katrina 20 years later? What did we learn from this USA Today Ipsos poll and also just your reporting about the collective memory for America?
It's really extraordinary. Hurricane Katrina was 20 years ago. And, there's a lot of news that's happened since then. This has been a pretty tumultuous 2 decades. And yet, most Americans, 85%, say they remember Hurricane Katrina. That includes people across the country, not just in the South, even among those who are now 18 to 34 years old. In our poll, they said they knew a little or a lot about Hurricane Katrina. They were in their teens or not even born yet when Hurricane Katrina struck.
Well, as you write, Susan, the issues Katrina ignited still have not been settled 2 decades later. Let's talk through some of those issues, starting with simply what should be done before the next big storm. Just remind us, Susan, if you would, how Katrina was really a man-made disaster as much as a natural one, and what lessons can be taken away.
Well, Katrina was definitely a natural disaster. It was a hurricane hitting our shores, but it was a man made one in that it made it so much worse. The big problem with Hurricane Katrina was when the levees in New Orleans were breached. And in investigations afterwards, that was blamed on engineering flaws by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers when they tried to save a buck when they built those levees. So they made the cost so much greater, $200 billion in costs and almost 1,400 people killed.
Well, what lessons did the nation receive about who should help after disaster, Susan? And how do Americans feel about that with, FEMA back in the news during the Trump era?
Americans really support the idea of some federal help of FEMA. 7 in 1 say there should be a major role for the federal government after disaster. But Americans don't necessarily trust the federal government. They trust local and state governments more to do a good job than the federal government. And they do not think the federal government has learned the lessons of Katrina. Just 1 in 5 say the federal response would be better if a storm like Katrina hit again than it was 20 years ago.
It's impossible to talk about hurricanes and extreme weather events without bringing up the climate conversation as well, Susan. Do Americans see these events as getting worse? How do they frame this in terms of the climate side of this?
Americans see the weather getting more extreme in their own communities. Most Americans say they see more tornadoes, more hurricanes, more earthquakes, more severe weather of all sorts in the places where they live. And they believe that climate change is a factor in that, but they are pessimistic about whether the country is going to do anything about that.
In terms of issues around race that this storm and the aftermath brought up, Susan, how do Americans think about those issues here 20 years later?
Americans saw a lot of lessons for Katrina with the need for disaster preparedness, the concerns about climate change. And there was another lesson that Americans took. Most Americans say that Katrina showed that race and economic status determine who gets hurt by a natural disaster and who gets helped. And that was true among Black respondents by 6 to 1. It was also true among white respondents by 3 to 1.
Well, as you write here, Susan, for some, the legacy of Katrina is personal, not policy. What did you take away from the conversations you had for this piece?
One of the young adults I interviewed for this piece said that his whole life is divided into pre-Katrina and post-Katrina. He says the same is true for his friends in New Orleans. It was a catastrophe that killed a lot of people. It sent residents of Louisiana across the country to Houston and elsewhere. Some of them never made it back to their hometown of New Orleans. It's left a mark that they have never forgotten, and some of them never really gotten over.
All right, Susan Page is USA Today's Washington bureau chief, joining us on the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
The flight from Katrina scattered thousands of evacuees across the country. A month after the storm, USA Today reported in 2005, 1.3 million FEMA aid applications poured in from every corner of the map. Refugees had found shelter from Houston to Chicago, Los Angeles to New York City, and Atlanta. Texas became the primary destination for Hurricane Katrina evacuees, with approximately 200,000 displaced Gulf Coast residents arriving in Houston alone. 1 year after Katrina, 18% of New Orleans residents were living in Texas. You can take a closer look at the New Orleans diaspora with an eye-opening graphic story on the site. We have a link in today's show notes. Katrina may have been an early warning sign of the insurance crisis now gripping the U.S. I spoke with USA Today reporter Andrea Riccier for more. Andrea, as always, I appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks for having me on.
So just starting with this, how did the insurance safety net fall short in the aftermath of Katrina?
So there were a bunch of things that happened during Katrina. One is that you may remember that, and I feel like you and I have maybe talked about this a couple times, but there's really two kinds of insurance that homeowners can have. One is homeowners insurance, which covers a whole variety of things, but homeowners insurance typically doesn't cover damage from flooding. And one of the things that we found out in Katrina was that because flood insurance is sort of, it's voluntary, nobody's really checking on it. When people saw a way to do without, they went without to save money, particularly in some of the poorer areas that we're talking about that were impacted by Katrina, like New Orleans. A big lower income population just did not have flood insurance. And homeowners insurance was not going to pay out for some of the damage that was caused by flooding. One of the other big things that you have to remember about Katrina was that individual homeowners and insurance companies alike based their assessment of risk, of how much risk there was, how much they could afford to insure, and how much insurance they needed to take out as a homeowner, based on the idea that the federal levy system would protect them from things like bad hurricanes. That did not happen, as we know.
Well, I know you outlined data in this piece that found Katrina generated, the largest loss in the history of insurance. Andrea, how much are we talking about if we could put some firm numbers on it?
What's kind of hard is that the data is actually really spotty. And if I could just take a minute to talk about that. Again, we're talking about two different kinds of insurance. They are not consistent. In many cases, homeowners have insurance through something called the National Flood Insurance Program, whereas they tend to have homeowners insurance through a company that we're more familiar with, like State Farm, for example. Even in the National Flood Insurance Program, there was a big reassessment of risk about 3 years ago. And again, I wrote this story a little while ago, so I'm blanking on some of the specifics, but it's really impossible to get a full data set that looks at both homeowners and flood, or either one individually for that matter, all the way back to before Katrina, through the hurricane, and up to the present time. So what I relied on in the story was a 2010 report that said that Katrina generated the largest single loss in the history of insurance, $41 billion, and almost 2 million claims across 6 states. And the vast majority of that was in Louisiana. I don't know, just because we spent so much time trying to track down data, I don't know if that's still the case. But as of 5, 6, maybe even 10 years after Katrina, it remained the biggest insurance payout to that time.
Wow. Well, Andrea, in terms of how this storm and many of the issues around it still resonate today, how have we seen a climate-driven insurance crisis in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the folks that I quoted in the story just like hit the nail on the head. He said, if we had known what we were seeing then, we would know, what the future looked like. Right now, we are all very familiar with the notion that we're in a homeowners insurance crisis. We've heard the term uninsurable future a bunch of times. The notion that all of our assumptions about what the climate is going to do to our property, to our homes, to our neighborhoods, that's just like upside down because climate change just keeps changing all the assumptions. We keep getting these 1 in 100 year storms like every year. So that's one thing that the insurers are sort of trying to figure out. As a result, they're pulling back, they're pulling out of areas, saying we're not going to do business here anymore, in some cases, including with existing homeowners who already have policies in place. They're jacking up the prices. People are having to rely on state-run plans. Just a lot of the shuffling that went on after Katrina happened, and insurers becoming not just risk averse, but also willing to fight against homeowner claims and saying, oh no, we never said we would cover that. We're looking for ways to not pay out what a homeowner could legitimately have expected them to pay out. You could sort of trace our modern era of all these conflicts back to Katrina, which was 20 years ago.
Wow. Andrea Ricchia is a reporter with USA Today. Excellent piece here on the 20th anniversary of Katrina. Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks, Taylor.
The arrest of 2 wildland firefighters accused of working illegally in Washington state has sparked a new round of debate over the Trump administration's priorities about wildfires and immigration enforcement. In videos shared widely on social media, federal immigration agents were recorded detaining 2 firefighters who were working on federal land in a remote area of the Olympic Peninsula. U.S. Border Patrol officials confirmed to USA Today that the men were arrested on immigration violations, while 42 other workers were released after being removed from the property. Videos of the incident earlier this week posted to social media have drawn broad condemnation by Washington state residents upset that federal officials halted firefighters' work to check immigration paperwork. And Democratic Washington Governor Bob Ferguson said he was deeply concerned about the situation. The crews were not directly fighting the 9,000-acre Bear Gulch fire, but were assisting in wildfire prevention efforts in the area, and federal officials said the arrest did not affect ongoing firefighting. But some state officials say the immigration detentions raise questions about White House priorities at a time when many fire departments have struggled to adequately hire wildland firefighters. Federal officials confirmed to USA Today that they targeted the workers as part of a criminal investigation into 2 companies that provide wildland firefighters. Federal officials did not immediately answer questions about why the 2 companies were targeted. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray Green and Kelly Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.